Welcome to News4Scotland on the Scotland channel. Here are this week's Scottish news headlines. Nothing has changed with regard to Scotland's bid for decolonisation at the United Nations, said Salvo Liberation Scotland, after it emerged this week that they have split with Geneva-based advocacy Justice for All International. In an acrimonious statement on their website, the Swiss-based human rights organisation accused Salvo Liberation Scotland of a material breach of contract and a profound act of disloyalty, accusing the independence group of fanaticism and a denial of political reality. But Salvo's Sarah Salyers said that a decision had been reached by Salvo Liberation Scotland to terminate their contract with Justice for All International, accusing the human rights advocacy of failing to meet its contractual obligations and suddenly adopting a devolutionist stance of the colonising state in its submissions to the UN, a U-turn from their previously publicly stated position that Scotland is effectively a colony. Salyers said that founder and executive director of Justice for All International Sharaf Azizov was acting on their behalf as a consultant for advice on negotiating their way around the UN, not as part of their legal team, as this stage of the decolonisation bid is about diplomacy within the UN, not legal action. The Salvo Liberation Scotland team includes former British Ambassador Craig Murray and top Scottish advocate Robert Black KC. Legal action would only come through the International Court of Justice if Scotland's right to self-determination continued to be denied by the English state posing as the UK, said Salyers. Due to failures to fulfil their contractual obligations, and at the request of the Liberation Scotland Committee, Salvo Scot Limited withdrew from the agreement with JPTI in October, using the 7-day notice clause provided for in the Memorandum of Understanding. All payments to JPTI were made in advance, and no further sums are outstanding or owed, said Salyers. Commenting on Justice for All International's scathing online statement, Salvo said, Sharaf Azizov's representation of the character of Liberation Scotland, the Liberation Scotland Committee and Salvo Scot Limited, as well as of the validity of the international case for decolonisation, wholly contradict his statements in personal appearances, press releases and official documents over the 6 months prior to the termination of the agreement. He has produced them now for the first time, following the termination of his relationship with us. Salvo said that it had expected discretion and professionalism from Justice for All International to not publicly discuss the terms of their agreement. However, Sarah Salyers said the acrimonious split changes nothing about Salvo Liberation Scotland's ongoing bid to decolonise Scotland through the UN. Sharaf Azizov was never part of our legal team, she said. He was acting as a consultant to help us navigate our way around the UN. In terms of pursuing Scotland's case, nothing has changed, she added. Scotland's patience has worn thin, First Minister John Swinney has been told. The 1820 Society, which promotes awareness and education about the Scottish radical insurrection of 1820, said in a letter to the First Minister that the spirit which once animated the independence cause seems to be entirely absent from the SNP's plan for independence. Our nation's patience has worn thin, said the Society. The cautious words and conditional promises of government have failed to match the rising will of our people. Scotland is again stirring, and this time she calls not for delay or careful calculation, but for leadership and courage. Your recent speech and accompanying paper on independence attempted to present a renewed case for a sovereign Scotland, but, while the technical framework may be thoughtful, the spirit which once animated our cause seems to be entirely absent. The insistence that independence can only be pursued if the SNP alone secures a parliamentary majority is a stance too narrow, too timid, and too far removed from the living pulse of the nation. The independence movement has grown far beyond one party. It belongs to the people, to every Scot who believes our future should be shaped in Scotland by Scots, and for the benefit of all who call this land home. History teaches us that Scotland's progress has never come from waiting for permission, the Society said. The men and women of 1820, the weavers, the workers, and the dreamers who rose for liberty and paid with their lives, did not wait for permission. Their courage, like that of Wallace and Bruce before them, flowed from conviction, not convenience. They knew that freedom demanded sacrifice, and that silence was complicity. The blood of those martyrs, shed on Scottish soil, consecrated the principle that government exists by the will of the governed, not the other way around. Their struggle was for justice, dignity, and the right of the people to choose their own destiny, the very principles that your office and the Scottish Government are bound to uphold. Yet today we find ourselves once again constrained, not by chains of iron, but by political hesitancy and fear of hearing disapproval from Westminster. The people of Scotland have shown, through consistent polling and relentless civic engagement, that they desire independence. But what they lack is a government demonstrating a willingness, beyond fine words, to turn that desire into democratic action. The insistence that only an SNP majority in Parliament can authorise that journey denies the broad coalition of independent support across our land. It divides people when unity is needed and dampens the hope that still burns in the hearts of ordinary Scots, said the Society. The First Minister did not reply personally to the letter, and Mark Allen from the Scottish Government's Directorate for Constitution failed to address the Society's specific concerns in a reply, referring them instead to the Scottish Government's recently published A Fresh Start with Independence document. The following information should provide reassurance that the Scottish Government is continuing in its efforts to achieve an independent Scotland, and is committed to providing the people of Scotland with the information they need to make an informed decision on independence, said the Scottish Government spokesman. However, the 1820 Society said, the people are not asking for perfection. They are asking for truth, conviction, and leadership. They seek a First Minister who will not simply manage devolution, but who will challenge the false limits imposed upon Scotland's democracy. Every year of delay adds to the burden of poverty, inequality, and despair that Westminster's policies inflict on our people, said the Society. Do not confine the destiny of a nation to the arithmetic of one political party's seats. Please unite with the wider movement, embrace the legacy of those who fought for freedom in 1820, and let Scotland's government finally stand shoulder to shoulder with her people, they said. Fail to do it, and history will record another lost moment in the long struggle for our freedom. Scottish Finance Secretary Shona Robison is seeking an urgent meeting with English Chancellor of the Exchequer Rachel Reeves, amid reports she's planning to raise taxes in her budget on November 26th. In a pre-budget speech, Reeves said she will have to make what she described as necessary choices, blaming Westminster's failed policies on world events. Reeves has refused to rule out tax hikes for everyone, but has previously ruled out a billionaire tax in the form of an annual wealth tax on assets. The Fraser of Allender Institute estimates a 2p rise in taxes could cut Scotland's budget by £1 billion. Robison wants Reeves to ditch her fiscal rules and support ordinary families with the cost of living and ensure that her budget will not result in further austerity for Scots families and cuts to Holyrood's budget. Scotland should not have to be left to pay the price for Labour's broken promises, she said. Robison added the chaos and confusion coming out of the UK government this week is confirmation Scotland shouldn't be leaving crucial decisions about our finances in the hands of incompetent Westminster governments. The 2029 general election is the day that the UK ends, according to Gordon McIntyre Kemp of pro-independence campaign group Believe in Scotland. A perfect storm is coming for the Union, and it's one it won't survive, he said. There will be many twists and turns on the road, but even as we head into the Holyrood election next year, it seems very likely that the SNP will be the largest party and will be able to form the next Scottish government. McIntyre Kemp said, regardless of what you personally think of the SNP, without an SNP-led government, independence is off the agenda for a long time. In May 2026, the SNP will form or lead the Scottish Government. Plaid Cymru are ahead in the polls, and so Wales will join Scotland on the path to independence. Then 1 year later in 2027, Sinn Féin will win in Northern Ireland, and call upon the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to agree to an all-Ireland unification referendum. At the same time, England will be 2 years away from a potential landslide victory for an English nationalist, English exceptionalist, proto-fascist Prime Minister Nigel Farage. At that point, it will be clear that the four nations of the UK are heading in different directions, and the constitutional conversation about the continuance of the UK will change dramatically, he said. General election 2029 is the day that the UK ends, said McIntyre Kemp. McIntyre Kemp added that Believe in Scotland has opened up talks with all of Scotland's political parties with elected parliamentarians. It's also why I recently signed, on behalf of Believe in Scotland, a memorandum of understanding on how to work together to deliver independence with John Swinney and the SNP, he added. If the Scottish independence movement, including its leading political parties, can come together in a new open and inclusive Scottish Independence Congress, we can be ready to take full advantage of that coming tipping point. Everyone has been calling for a reunification of the independence movement, and the Believe in Scotland SNP deal commits the biggest political party and the biggest campaign to making that happen. McIntyre Kemp continued, Believe in Scotland are not the whole movement, but we are the campaigning arm of the movement. No one comes close to matching our scale and the frequency of our independence campaigning, and so no one feels the frustration at the lack of progress to independence more than we do. Scotland has already waited too long for its independence. We must take our independence at the next practical opportunity, and in my opinion that will most likely be a de facto referendum at the 2029 general election, unless the SNP can somehow force an earlier referendum. There can be no ifs and absolutely no buts. We must be ready, or Scotland's chance to become independent could be gone forever. People in Scotland deserve to know why we are hosting Trump's troops, Scottish Greens MSP Patrick Harvey said, after England's Ministry of Defence refused to give details about why US troops are being permanently deployed on Scottish soil. American Poseidon P-8 anti-submarine spy and warplanes are being stationed at Lossiemouth, the first time the US has had a permanent military presence in Scotland since the end of the Cold War. It means Scotland, not England, would be the first strike target in any war the English state decided to become involved with. How can people democratically scrutinise an arrangement when we aren't even being told the basics of what it is? Asked Harvey. The Scottish government was not informed about the English government's decision to allow foreign troops and warplanes to be permanently stationed in Scotland. The Ministry of Defence has refused to release any details on the decision for the US deployment at RAF Lossiemouth, claiming it would give an advantage to our adversaries. The UK has already been heavily criticised for its participation of the US-led invasion of Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003, and is currently being criticised for its illegal military support for Israel's genocide against the civilian population in Gaza. Military expert Frank Ledwidge from the University of Portsmouth said the significance of Lossiemouth's role is heavily tied to a maritime passage stretching between the UK, Iceland and Greenland, and the monitoring of Russian submarines seeking to reach the Atlantic Ocean. Stop the War described it as an affront to our democratic rights. They are deployed here at a time when the US has committed acts of military aggression in the Middle East, and as the US continues to stoke war and military build-up in Europe, a spokesperson said. The deployment of such forces here is part of this militarisation and escalation. As part of the UK, Scotland has no say as to its defence, nor which countries can deploy their military or the purpose for that deployment on Scottish soil. The Royal Air Force's decision to buy 12 F-35A jets, which can be armed with B-61 gravity bombs, risks triggering a nuclear escalation in order to please Donald Trump, according to a report by the Nuclear Information Service and Nukewatch. England's purchase of fighter jets armed with nuclear bombs is a primarily political move which gives the country no obvious military advantage, said the report. The report adds that the purchase of F-35A jets is more about distracting from questions relating to the US-Europe relationship within NATO rather than developing a must-have military capability. The nuclear bombs provided to the RAF would merely replicate the capabilities already offered by other NATO members, added the report, which quotes Bernard Gray, a former top Ministry of Defence official responsible for weapons procurement, who said if money was no object, we could view the $2 billion price tag for doing this as a thank you to Uncle Sam. The UK signing up for NATO's tactical nuclear mission could be at odds with the position set out in Lord Robertson's Strategic Defence Review published earlier this year. The former NATO Secretary-General has suggested that the capability gap is better bridged by investing heavily in conventional weapons. As part of the UK, Scotland has no say on its own defence, or which conflicts around the world to be involved in, or whether it wants to become a first-strike nuclear target in the event of a nuclear war. A UK-wide poll has put Keir Starmer's Labour Party in fourth place behind Reform, the Greens and the Conservatives. The Find Out Now survey put Labour on just 15%, a staggering 3 points behind the Greens as Zach Polanski's party continues to surge in popularity with voters in England. The poll of 2,717 people put Reform UK on 33%, the Greens on 18%, the Conservatives on 16% and the Lib Dems on 11%. Labour came just 12% ahead of the SNP, who voters can only opt for in Scotland. Translated into seats, it means Reform would win a general election if it were to be held now with 386 MPs. The SNP are expected to win in next year's election for the Westminster-controlled devolved assembly, but Scotland, as part of the UK, would get yet another English Prime Minister they did not vote for imposed on them in 2029. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes has announced a £42 million funding package to build 800 new homes in Edinburgh. The money is part of a £1.3 billion project to regenerate the city's Granton waterfront, Scotland's largest brownfield regeneration project. The low-carbon housing project showed the Scottish Government's commitment to tackling the housing and climate emergencies, said Forbes. Work will start next year and will feature 847 net-zero homes, including 387 affordable homes, a new primary school and space for 14 businesses. The wider Granton waterfront regeneration scheme will deliver 3,500 new homes, space for leisure facilities and Scotland's largest coastal park. John Swinney assures us that all we need to do to achieve independence is rerun the 42 months between March 2011 and September 2014. But March 2026 is not March 2011. The Independence Forum Scotland Convention in Glasgow on Saturday was told. Swinney is wrong. He is horribly and disastrously wrong, speaker and independence blogger Peter Bell said. Everything is different. Thanks to the likes of Alf Baird, Sarah Salyers and Liberation Scotland, our understanding of Scotland's constitutional situation is different. Thanks to such as Richard Murphy, Tim Rideout and the Scottish Currency Research Group, our appreciation of Scotland's economic situation is different, said Bell. To make the devolved Scottish Parliament once again the Parliament of Scotland, we must cast off the chains of devolution. Those powers were taken from us. We must take them back. Power is never given. Power is only taken. The most fundamental of all the powers that are illegitimately withheld from our Parliament is power over constitutional affairs. The proper constitutional referendum that is our destination can only be reached by way of an act of the Scottish Parliament. There can only be such an act if the Scottish Parliament possesses the appropriate legislative competence. The Scottish Parliament can only acquire this legislative competence by taking it, he said. Scottish UDI is an attempt to map out the best route from where we are to where we want to be, added Bell. The SNP have won a council by-election in Fife, called after a former Labour councillor was convicted of sex offences against a teenage girl. Anne-Marie Caldwell took the former Labour seat as the new councillor for Buckhaven, Methil and Weems villages, replacing the disgraced David Graham. With a total of 1,594 votes and a turnout of 27.3%, she secured the seat ahead of Reform UK's Mark Davies, who received 1,080 votes, and Labour's Donna Donnelly, who got 778 votes. Jill Riley Lib Dems got 99 votes, Alapa Party's Christine Watson had 83 votes, Scottish Conservative and Unionist candidate Brian Mills got 64 votes, and Sovereignty's Kieran Anderson secured 45 votes. ScotRail, Scotland's publicly owned rail company, is to invest £346.8 million into new trains. The SNP government approved the investment, and tenders have gone out to potential suppliers. The successful bidders will have the responsibility of supplying the trains, maintaining them, and providing the spares for a period of 15 years from the contract start date in April 2028. ScotRail will be able to extend the agreement for a period of 35 years, maximising operational continuity. The new trains will help replace the existing diesel trains and part of the electric trains in operation in the city of Glasgow, allowing the company to renew about 2/3 of its train inventory with lower maintenance expenses. The scheme involves the supply of 41 electric trains, with the other 28 trains being battery electric trains. The focus of these investments is on reducing the emission of CO2, increasing efficiency, and improving the comfort of passengers. The regional train network will also be noise-free, reliable, and climate-friendly. The Scottish Government has funded the provision of a mobile MRI scanner at Elgin's Dr. Gray's Hospital from December 1st, in a bid to reduce waiting times for those currently waiting for MRI services. This initiative will reduce the number of patients having to travel to Aberdeen to be seen. The announcement was welcomed by Moray MSP Richard Lockhead, who said, "I very much welcome today's announcement and will of course continue to press NHS Grampian to find a way to make MRI services available more permanently at Dr. Gray's." Polling trends in 2025 show women are now more supportive of Scottish independence than men, marking a striking reversal in Scotland's political landscape. Out of a previous 8 polls carried out by various polling firms, 5 show women supporting independence more than men. This is a major shift in the demographic behaviours seen in Scotland, which historically show male voters were more likely than female voters to support independence. In 2014, 9% more men than women supported independence. More than a decade after the historic vote, the broken promises of the No campaign echo around Scotland alongside worsening living conditions, an erosion of human rights, and an increasingly toxic Westminster. Research cited shows women supported independence because they wanted more control and influence in their lives. Liberation Scotland's messaging and structure reflects this desire for empowerment, rather than treating women as a demographic to be targeted. Women are increasingly viewing independence as protection against democratic backsliding, far-right politics, and threats to rights. Almost 100% of children in 73 areas of England are living in income-deprived families, whilst child poverty rates in Scotland are the lowest in the UK, government figures reveal. Blackpool, Middlesbrough, Burnley, Manchester and Birmingham are the top 5 most deprived local authority areas, whilst Jaywick and Nigel Farage's Clacton constituency in Essex tops the ranking for the 4th time in a row. This is despite UK politicians continually claiming Scotland is performing badly under its devolved government, when in fact Scotland has the lowest child poverty rates in the UK, and other services including its NHS are generally outperforming England. In addition, child poverty rates are still falling largely due to policies like the Scottish Child Payment, whilst rates in England are continuing to rise. The Scottish Government has also set statutory targets to reduce child poverty, with the long-term goal of eradicating it. This achievement is despite the fact that Scotland's budgets are controlled by Westminster and the Scottish Government, as part of the UK has both hands tied behind its back. Scots have seen some of the sharpest energy bill hikes across the UK in recent years, despite the fact that Scotland is self-sufficient in renewable energy, and despite promises in 2014 that remaining in the UK would not lead to a huge rise in the cost of living. New analysis has shown that the average domestic electricity bill in southern Scotland has risen from £436 in 2008 to £1,115 in 2024, while northern Scotland experienced an even sharper increase from £423 to £1,140. UK government figures showed that the sharpest rise was for direct debit customers in northern Scotland, whose bills have nearly tripled, up by 182%. This is despite the fact unionists claimed in 2014 that independence would lead to a huge increase in the cost of living, something which is happening within the union itself, despite Scotland generating enough electricity to power every single home and business in Scotland with cheap, clean and inexhaustible energy. But the UK's profit-driven and distorted energy market means despite this, Scotland is paying among the highest energy prices in the world. Independence would allow Scotland to benefit its own people with an energy system that works in their interests, not the interests of rich private shareholders. Claims by Lib Dem leader Ed Davey that the BBC belongs to all of us has been rubbished by media expert and author of The BBC, Myth of a Public Service, Dr. Tom Mills. While it should be true that the BBC belongs to the public, it simply isn't the case, he said. First of all, it's a royal charter company, so formally it's a creature of the British state, said Mills. Mills, who is chair of the Media Reform Coalition, believes that the public must be directly involved in how the BBC is run, which is not currently the case. The BBC has come in for continued criticism north of the border over its treatment of Scotland, which is largely omitted from its overwhelmingly English schedules, except where the corporation attacks Scotland at every opportunity at the behest of the English UK government, said the Scotland Channel's Peter Geel. The anti-Scottish bias and propaganda put out by the BBC in relation to Scotland is a disgrace, but is to be expected from an English broadcaster that acts as a tool for the British English state, said Geel. That's why the Scotland Channel was set up, to start the process of creating an alternative, truly Scottish television channel that focuses on Scotland through a wide range of programmes in a pro-Scottish way. To do it, we need the support of all our viewers to like and share our broadening range of shows and tell others about us. Only when we can get people to watch the channel as part of their overall television viewing mix can we start to change the narrative about Scotland, he said. We don't have the multi-million-pound resources of the BBC or the billionaire-backed GB News or Sky News. That's why we depend on you, our viewing audience, to tell everyone you know about us and encourage them to watch and interact with our channel through the comments section. If you are able to make a donation towards our running costs, please consider doing so because at present Scotland has virtually no visibility on British state broadcasting. Despite running on a shoestring, the Scotland Channel has ambitious plans for the future. We are introducing our very first comedy show in February and have plans for a sitcom in the near future. Deputy First Minister Kate Forbes has urged the government in England not to create obstacles to the Scottish Government's plans to introduce a direct Scotland-Europe ferry service, which is due to start on May 26, 2026. Forbes has written to Scottish Secretary Douglas Alexander, confirming the Scottish Government's intention to do everything in its power to remove obstacles to the project, calling on the UK Government to confirm they are willing to address at pace the border control issues which remain reserved. The project seeks to bring back the direct ferry link, in the form of a freight and passenger service between Rosyth and the French port of Dunkirk, which has been marred by delays in recent years. But the Scottish Government confirmed that the route could reopen under proposed changes in legislation, by allowing flexibility on the location requirements for a border control post. The proposed changes would allow products arriving from the EU to be docked at Rosyth and then checked at the border control post in Grangemouth. Officials have been instructed to prepare a consultation on the legislation, which is expected to be launched as soon as possible and before the Scottish Parliament is dissolved for next May's elections. Scots are currently forced to travel down to England if they want to take a ferry to mainland Europe after the freight service between Rosyth and Zeebrugge, operated by DFDS, stopped sailing 7 years ago, with the Danish operator saying it wasn't economically viable. That winds up our stories for this week. Join us again next Friday at 7 p.m. or any time thereafter. Thanks for watching.